The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the warm welcome. Today I decided to come up with in the format of introducing the research findings related to the role of artificial intelligence as a reading comprehension test designer. Why this format? Because quite often we hear about artificial intelligence in terms of its application, but what about the effectiveness and the productivity of artificial intelligence? If we consider also what huge impact it has on the communication of future generation, as described in deep detail in the books by Rodney Jones, Paul G. Hayes, Kiea, and many more. So, in order to understand, first of all, we need to understand what artificial intelligence is. It is the ability of computers and technologies to think like humans. And when we say think, we understand this process. To understand the input, which is a huge amount of human language that is submitted to the application, to the website, to the program, then our artificial intelligence, this technology or machine, is going to process all the data and come up with an answer that is similar. We are not in the stage of saying identical, but at least similar to human communication. And as for a reading comprehension test, then here we are talking about the 100% overlap between whatever is described and delivered in a text and between whatever is understood by a student. This overlap has to be 100% accurate, and if it is, then we say that the text has been comprehended in the best way possible. So far, the research has been quite positive about the application of artificial intelligence in writing, listening, speaking, grammar, and vocabulary. But what is interesting that in those cases, there has been the experimentation or the practice of a single application or platform, and we can't say that the major focus was on the language performance. Like the language performance was an outcome of the project of experimenting the artificial intelligence application. And very little has been done in the realm of reading comprehension test design. While it is very helpful to understand how effective it is in this area, because after COVID-19, teachers were facing huge trouble to pass on to online teaching one, and at the same time looking for authentic texts that would compensate for the lacks in their course books and also would spice up their teaching. And many teachers had the worries of sharing a lot more time than needed on the design of reading comprehension tests. So if we so these findings will be helpful to them to become more confident about the using of artificial intelligence and to be more willing to incorporate authentic tests in their teachings, because they have a device, an extra hand to come up with the design of reading comprehension tests. The results will be very useful also for autonomous learner, let's say school graduate who need to practice their English, for example, to pass a standardized test. So they can keep track of their own learning, they can choose any authentic material, put it or submit it to the artificial intelligence platform, and will come up with a test, and they will understand how much they have understood from the test, and this way also measure their progress. And finally, the results are very helpful for standardized test organizations like ETS, British Council, which are in a constant need of coming up with new reading comprehension tests. Now, the questions that we focused in this research are the following: whether students' performance changed dependent on the test, artificial intelligence generated and teacher designed. What differences were noticed in artificial intelligence generated tests and teacher designed tests? And the final question: what students and teachers' attitudes were to the use of artificial intelligence. Now the participants were 48 high school students at a B1 proficiency level. They were non-native speakers of English. The same goes for the teachers. They were 5, and still English was not their native language. And each week, the students were exposed to 2 tests on the same text. One of the tests was designed by the teacher, and the second one was designed by artificial intelligence. And after these 2 texts, the students were given introspective questionnaires to reflect on the differences between the tests without knowing which one had been generated by AI and which one by their teachers. And then after 5 weeks, the teachers were interviewed after being distributed all the tests, and there was a focus group discussion with 25 students. And the instruments applied to process the data were reliability analysis, independent t-tests, and comparative analysis of all the items. Now, and this is one of the striking moments. In order to understand whether there was a difference in students' performance dependent on the test, we had to measure the reliability of both tests. And looking at this table, we see that there was a difference, but the difference was the slightest, 0.05. Which means that artificial intelligence here did not perform worse than teachers by providing consistent results. Considering how much progress artificial intelligence has experienced since 2019 and how much it needs to go, I guess these findings are really surprising in terms of AI advancement. Then what we did was we tried to understand whether the design of the text was a significant factor impacting students' behavior. And we learned that in the case of the first and the third test, the test didn't impact students' behavior. What does it mean? That it didn't matter whether the test was designed by a teacher or by artificial intelligence. However, it impacted significantly students' performance during week 2, during week 4, and during week 5. Overall, looking at the means, students performed higher in artificial intelligence generated tests. As we see during week 3, 4, 5. However, there were high scores from teacher design tests during week 1 and week 2. Of course, these findings have to be interpreted in terms of the differences existing between the tests. Now, the comparative analysis of the items revealed the following. Artificial intelligence came up with more questions than teacher design tests. And what is also noticeable that artificial intelligence also came up with more distractors. It was less in the case of teachers, considering that sometimes teachers came up with only 3 options, and one of them would be all of the above or not mentioned, or even not given. So in this case, in terms of the number of the options, it seems that artificial intelligence was quite in inverted commas hardworking. As for the content of the questions, artificial intelligence came up with 30 detailed questions and 2 main idea questions, which is nothing strange because this type of content is typical of multiple choice questions. In the case of teachers, they also came up with detail, but more main idea questions, which asked about the overall idea of the text. So what is also interesting that in the case of artificial intelligence generated items, there was less work with the language. So if you look at the distractors, 70 were not mentioned in the text at all. And by not mentioned, it has to be stated that they were taken from unknown corpora, never discussed in the text. However, teachers were quite hardworking in terms of developing quite complicated distractors, and the complication was expressed in paraphrases. They would use simple complex synonyms, antonyms, substitution, the use of homographs. So the word was mentioned in the text, but it was included in the distractor. However, it was never the case in the case of artificial intelligence. And there were only 24 options or distractors that were not discussed in the text. Overall, we can say that teacher design tests were longer in their wording than artificial intelligence. We can see, looking at the figures, that teachers were double more in the application of vocabulary than artificial intelligence was. So, which comes to show that truly artificial intelligence came up with more options and distractors, and its language was short, which might seem quite helpful. But what was quite helpful for the students' performance was finding or identifying correct answers, because the keys were taken from the text, and the distractors were not mentioned in the text. So it was quite easy to eliminate the distractors, the wrong answers, and to identify the keys. And also short vocabulary was very harmful because it didn't provide enough information to understand both the questions and also to identify the context. As for teacher design tests, then of course they were harder because teachers did their best to come up with more complicated items. Because they had, and here the behavior of the artificial intelligence and teachers was connected with the goals they had with the testing, which we will discuss in the conclusion part. There were also some inconsistencies. They were very few in teacher design tests. For example, missing correct answers. Now, what is interesting that in the case of missing answers, um, the teachers formulated keys or distractors that couldn't be inferred from the text. In other words, they were missing answers in terms of their content. Like here, in D, we see that this is a distractor which couldn't be interpreted from the text. And in this example, we see that there was unsuccessful choice of the word floor. Why was it unsuccessful? Because the discussion was about whatever happened in the garden and not whatever happened at home. While the teacher decided to use the word floor, which could create a kind of barrier for choosing a C as the correct answer. As for inconsistencies, they were three. Let's take this one. So it was an impure item. Why? Because it is longer in its length, and we see that all the forms of these options and distractors are different. The same goes for the second example. We see that here we have 2 versus 2. A and B are in the form of a bare infinitive, while C and D apply a full infinitive. So, in the case of artificial intelligence, they were missing answers, and they outnumbered teacher design test. So how? For example, mainly they were missing answers in terms of their forms. Like here we see the question is about the manner. How does stress affect the respiratory system? Or how did the carrots become clean? But the answers were given in an awkward form, without being about the manner. Usually manner is expressed with the prepositions by, with, and the gerundial construction, or it could have been passive construction. But here we see some strange sentences, some nomination, which never can be relevant to this question and also to the question below. As for this one, question 5, we see that it was not the correct answer because it was not relevant in terms of the content. Still, question 2 couldn't be interpreted from the text or couldn't be inferred from the text. And there were inconsistencies in artificial intelligence generated tests, and they were more. For example, if you look at question 3, we see that there is an inconsistency which also serves as a cue or clue to the correct answer, because 1 is the only option in the past form. The question was in the past form, while the distractors were in a bare infinitive form. So, of course, the students who were cognitively advanced would notice that if the question was in the past, naturally their answer could have been in the past. Other inconsistencies, let's say question 2. Here we have 3 versus 1. Option 2, option 3, and option 4 are in the same form, while option 1, which was also the key, was both longer and in this case it was a matter of length. And the same goes for question 8. As we see here, we have the key that is the longest, 2 distractors of middle length, and the 4th distractor, which was the shortest. As for students' attitude, it is interesting that in the introspective questionnaires, they were quite clear in their choices. For a week, they liked artificial intelligence generally week 4 and week 5. And there was only 1 week that they voted for week 2. But what is interesting that during the focus group discussion, those 25 students were distributed the tests and they were shared the information, which test had been designed by their teachers and which test had been designed by artificial intelligence. They dramatically changed their opinion, saying that they didn't like artificial intelligence generated tests. And in response to the question why, and also whether they would like to see the integration of artificial intelligence into their learning, also assessment of reading comprehension tests, they said no. And the reason was that artificial intelligence didn't know them in person. But their teachers did. And also artificial intelligence could come up with more complicated tests which could harm their learning. As for teachers, considering how much literature has been published about the dangers of artificial intelligence to replace teachers in future, teachers were quite optimistic and favored the application of artificial intelligence into their teaching, and also in the design of reading comprehension tests. And the explanation was that after COVID-19, they started feeling how important it was to have an assistant, to have an extra hand that could help them at least in a way. And artificial intelligence, the design of reading comprehension tests could be one of those hands. And they mainly favored the application of artificial intelligence, which we can see in the ranking, 3.5 out of 5. And here, one of the controversial points was that, according to the teachers, the students would experience any kind of disapproval or approval of artificial intelligence, because teachers thought that for their students what would matter was to perform in the best way possible. However, in the focus group discussion, we learned that it was not the case at all. Now, what is the conclusion of this, in my opinion, very helpful findings is that artificial intelligence is highly competitive, considering that, yes, the development and the launch of its application has started in the 1960s, but the dramatic development started during and after COVID-19, like 5 years, and it is already reliable with teacher design tests. What will happen within 10 years? So it has the potential of outperforming teachers. Of course, when talking about the differences between teacher design tests and artificial intelligence generated tests, it has to be considered that teachers and artificial intelligence had different purposes. Artificial intelligence aimed at checking the overall comprehension of the text, That's why it mainly relied on details and on the structures not mentioned in the text, without thinking that it would facilitate the answering process. And maybe that is why students mainly scored higher in the artificial intelligence test. But teachers had another purpose, which was coming up with harder, of middle complexity and easy items, so that they could differentiate between their strongest students, weak students, and students of medium proficiency, in order to provide the objectivity in their assessment. That's why they put a lot of work into their tests, into the development of distractors, which was witnessed with paraphrasing, as well as relying less on detailed questions. So, as for the attitudes, surprisingly, teachers were positive about the use of artificial intelligence, but the problem arises if they were so pessimistic or optimistic about the application of artificial intelligence. What would happen if students find out that their teachers have applied artificial intelligence, considering how negative and critical they were about artificial intelligence? So it is here that once more the research findings of this result are important. These results come to show that teachers should consider some kind of guidance and preparation of their students before the application of artificial intelligence into their teaching. This can be done with the explanation, with the guidance, and why not with the practice of artificial intelligence by their students first, and then the incorporation of those platforms for reading comprehension tests. And here, I forgot to mention that the application or a website that we applied for the generation of reading comprehension test was Question, which is an open platform and has an opportunity of, if I'm not mistaken, 10 free reading comprehension test designs for the first time when you get registered on the platform. So actually this much for my speech. If you have any questions, I will be very happy to answer, of course, if I can.
You have taken us by storm, to be honest. It was a very thorough presentation with such noteworthy results. And I would have never expected these results. I wouldn't have guessed them, to be honest.
Which part? I guess it was very surprising for the students, right? Attitude AI.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes, because
I would expect the same, as I have turned to AI into the creation of tests. However, I found them not valid enough and lacking all these elements that you mentioned. Even grammar or context related questions were seriously lacking. And it turned out that I had to spend far more time into revising and correcting the test already prepared than actually prepare 5 questions myself. Not that I will not be using them again, any AI devices, I mean, but it has to be after a long, very careful. It has to be done with great, after being careful. This is what my personal experience, at least.
Yes, and what I've noticed that these platforms or applications have to come up with the functionality of improving or editing the questions on the spot before turning them into worksheets. Maybe with the conscious understanding that still it is in the initial state of its functionality, and teachers, might consider improving the items a bit more.
And of course, on another topic, this constant correction helps us as teachers improve, meaning that oftentimes I've had to paraphrase myself or to add further specifications in order to acquire a better result as far as the context. So it's a win-win. However, again, it's not the super medicine that will help us create tests. The teacher factor cannot be replaced.
Exactly.
Even in the test making.
Yeah, exactly. Interestingly, this research shows that both teachers and artificial intelligence have their strengths and weaknesses. They had their flaws and their strong parts. And also in terms of using unknown vocabulary, yes, teachers came up with more unknown words to their students than artificial intelligence did, which is one of the strengths of artificial intelligence. The language was simplified because you have the option of choosing the proficiency level of the student. Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if anyone else would like to ask.
I would add a lot of things, but I'm the next one, and I think I will give good answers to some of these questions. So
which is why you're the next.
Start.
Which explains why you're the next, and you wouldn't be the last one. Actually, Rob Howard would be just right after you if he didn't have a plane to catch. And then we would have all the AI sessions. But unfortunately, Rob couldn't do it, couldn't make it on the Saturday, and he will close the conference. So we will just hold this part of the presentations. Shad Shinoragal Nare, and we are now moving on to our next presenter, Jasmina Stuchli. I'm not even sure if I'm pronouncing your surname correctly.
Jasmina Stuchli.
Okay, that's we are so close in pronunciation terms. Jasmina, I suppose you have your sharing rights. I'm going to stop the recording and start it again.